This is here with Mr. Chesnoff and Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Balian, and Mr. Lewin are present. The defendant is present, and you may continue your examination.
So, Mr. Durst, you agree you spoke to Susan Berman on the night of the 22nd, sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, correct?
Correct.
And you further agree that you discovered her body at 10 a.m., no more than, at the most, 11 hours after you spoke to her the next day, correct?
Correct.
And you agree that when you found her body, there was no indication that she was still stiff or in rigor, correct?
Correct.
And you agree that when you found her body, her face was cold, correct?
It felt cold, yes.
And you agree that the testimony of Dr. Fajardo was that rigor mortis takes between 18 and 36 hours from the time it starts till the time it finishes, correct?
I'll accept that.
So, Mr. Durst, can you explain how it was then that you were able to speak to Susan Berman at 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. the night before, given what you've just agreed to?
She could have died at 9 a.m. Rigor mortis does not set in immediately. That's what the doctor said. There's a period of time between death and when rigor mortis sets in.
So then can you explain, Mr. Durst, why her body would have been cold?
I never said her body was cold. I said I put my hand over her nose and her mouth and it felt cold.
In fact, Mr. Durst, what you said, correct, is that originally you put your hand over her face and the first thing you said was her breath was cold, correct?
Well, that's clearly not right. She wasn't breathing.
But that's what you said, correct?
No.
Sure.
Judge Jack, that's not what the record reflects.
Oh, I think it does. Overruled.
And Mr. Durst, then you said that actually it was her face that was cold, correct?
It was her face that was cold.
And Mr. Durst, are you alleging that based on your examination or your contact with Susan Berman, that her face was a different temperature than the rest of her body?
I am not alleging anything like that. All I'm saying is I put my hand over her nose and mouth and it felt cold.
Can you explain, Mr. Durst, why her face would have been cold if she was just killed?
How would I explain something like that?
Yes, that's the question, Mr. Durst. How would you explain that?
I would ask Doctor whatever his name is to explain it.
All right, Mr. Durst, the time when Susan Berman made this reservation at the Chateau Marmont was when? When did she make the reservation?
I don't know.
Well, you agree the reservation would have been made in December, sometime in December, correct?
Correct.
And you agree, Mr. Durst, that there's no indication of a charge to the Chateau Marmont, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that the way reservations work is that they charge your card, and then if there's a refund, they credit your card, correct?
I don't know that.
You had a $113,000 balance on your American Express card, and you've stayed at hotels around the world, correct?
Correct.
And you're telling me that you don't have experience in fine hotels, Mr. Durst, and you don't understand that when you make a reservation, they charge you, and then when you cancel it, if you cancel it in time, they give you a credit. Isn't that correct?
Not to my knowledge.
So how is it that it works, Mr. Durst, in your experience, with all of the expensive hotels that you booked? How does it work?
How does what work?
Well, Mr. Durst, isn't it true that when you make a reservation, they charge your card?
I don't know.
You have no knowledge.
I have no knowledge.
Well, Mr. Durst, does it sound reasonable, Mr. Durst, that the way that it would work is that if you had a reservation at a hotel and you did not cancel that reservation until the night was half over, that there should be a charge from that hotel.
Susie said she would do her Susie best to get them to not charge us.
Well, Mr. Durst, wouldn't you agree that the charge would have already happened, and what Susie would have to do is get them to issue a credit? Wouldn't you agree?
You're telling me that that's how it works. I have no knowledge that that's how it works.
So your belief would be, Mr. Durst, let's back this up. Your first statement, Mr. Durst, correct, when I asked you about the Chateau Marmont, is you said there would be a charge on your credit card for that hotel bill. Isn't that what you testified to?
That's what I thought.
And then, Mr. Durst, when I showed you the American Express bill, you agreed it's not there, correct?
Correct.
Can you explain why it's not there?
Because Susie Berman used her influence to get them to not charge us for the first night.
Mr. Durst,
She had made a reservation for 4 nights, the 22nd, the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th. That's 5 nights. And she had gotten them to not charge us the first night because we weren't there.
and you're saying it's your understanding, you don't have any idea, you've never heard of the idea of hotels charging you in advance of the night that you're supposed to stay there for your first night at a hotel, and then potentially crediting you back later. That's not your understanding of how this works?
Correct.
All right, let's talk about the idea. You said that you were going to arrive sometime at 12 or 1 in the morning and then go over to the Chateau Marmont. Would you agree that probably a room there is going to be somewhere $500, $1,000 a night? Minimum?
I would guess 500.
And Mr. Durst, why would you spend that kind of money to stay in a hotel that at the very earliest you're not going to arrive there until after midnight? Does that make sense?
That's because I'm cheap.
Well, if you're cheap, Mr. Durst, then why would you want to spend $500 to $1,000 a night for a hotel room that you're not going to get there until the night is half over?
I'm going to tell you that that's what we did.
By the way, you were grinning when you said that you were cheap.
Yes.
What was that about?
Well, you've accused me of being cheap.
Mr. Durst, you've admitted to being cheap, correct?
I admit to being cheap.
So, again, do you agree, Mr. Durst, that spending $500 to $1,000 a night at a hotel that you're not going to arrive at until 12 or 1 in the morning, does that sound like the way that someone is cheap would spend their money?
No.
All right, let's move on. So you get to the house, you park your car out front in the same area as where we saw the police car, correct?
In the same area as what?
Remember when we had the picture up yesterday and there was a marquee, a Ford or Mercury, what looked like a detective car that was parked, and I asked you, is that where you parked the car? It was to the left of the 1527.
I did not realize that was a detective car. But yes, where that black car was about where I parked.
And you said you got out, and what time is this when you're arriving?
Around 10.
And, Mr. Durst, you get there at 10 a.m. By the way, were there ever plans for you guys to go to the Rose Cafe?
That's what Susan wanted to do.
The Rose Cafe is all the way in Venice, is that correct?
The Rose Cafe is definitely in Venice.
You would agree that the Chateau Marmont is nowhere near Venice, is that correct?
The Chateau Marmont is in West Hollywood.
And to answer my question, you would agree the Chateau Marmont is nowhere near the Rose Cafe, correct?
Depends what you mean by near.
Well, with LA traffic, et cetera, Mr. Durst, you would agree that driving from West Hollywood in the morning to go to breakfast to the Rose Cafe in Venice is going to take an inordinate amount of time, correct?
It depends what inordinate means.
How long do you think that commute would have taken you?
About 45 minutes.
So the plan was to get up. Why, if you were going to go to breakfast at the Rose Cafe, why stay at the Chateau Marmont?
That's what Susie wanted to do. It was her staycation.
Okay, so you arrive at the house, you park the car, and you said Susie has already sent you keys, is that correct?
Correct.
When did she send you the keys?
3 or 4 months before then, when we had made similar plans for a staycation, which was canceled because she got some big meeting with a showrunner.
Mr. Durst, you've heard the testimony from Susan's friends about her activities, correct?
I heard lots of testimony.
Isn't it true, Mr. Durst, that Susan Berman, near the end of her life, was for the most part staying at home and walking her dogs? That was her life. Agreed?
I have no knowledge of what her life was like.
I thought she's your best friend, Mr. Durst.
Yes, but when we were not living in the same city, we did not speak that frequently.
Well, wait a minute. You're speaking frequently enough with her to arrange a one-week staycation with her, correct?
Correct.
You were aware, Mr. Durst, that professionally she was not doing well, correct?
No, she was not making money.
And you were aware that she needed money, which you were giving her, correct?
Correct.
And you were aware that she was worried about having enough money to feed her dogs and have a place to live, correct?
That is not something I'm aware of.
Didn't you mention, Mr. Durst, in the letter that she wrote you, didn't she mention to you that she was having issues trying to find a place to live that would take her dogs?
I remember the language. I don't think she expected to be able to rent an apartment that would take 3 dogs.
So, Mr. Durst, wouldn't you agree that at that time in her life, she had very little going on the job front?
No, she always was talking about things she was working on.
Working on, Mr. Durst, at home, correct?
Well, that's where her office was. Her office was at home.
Right, she spent her time at home writing, talking on the phone, etc. Is that correct?
I think most writers probably work out of their home.
So, Mr. Durst, why would she need to send you keys to her house when she's home all the time?
You've concluded that she's home all the time. I have not said she's home all the time.
You just said that you agree she slept at home, correct?
She what?
She slept at home, correct?
Correct.
Did she have a boyfriend that you were aware of?
Well, the question had to do with Niles Brenner.
Your testimony is Niall Brenner was her boyfriend.
Yes.
You were aware, Mr. Durst, that Niall Brenner was gay, correct?
She was concerned that he was gay, but she seemed to think that she could get him to accept that he was bi.
So, Mr. Durst, you agree that she was not spending nights with Niall Brenner, correct?
I don't agree. I don't know if she was spending nights with Niall Brenner. I don't know how much time she spent at home. I don't know what her life was like.
Well, so, Mr. Durst, are you aware, from what you do know, of Susan Berman having any commitments at all, whether they are social or professional, outside of the house?
Yes.
What would that be?
Well, whatever that relative is that she was supposed to see for Christmas Eve dinner, and then Christmas Day she was supposed to see Denny Marcus.
So, Mr. Durst, so what you mentioned is that over Christmas, on Christmas Eve and Christmas, she had plans to see some family and a friend. Is that correct?
Correct.
My question is, were you aware of in Susan's daily life her having professional or personal commitments outside of her home?
I would not be in a position to know. She didn't tell me everything she was doing, and we did not speak daily.
Well, Mr. Durst, why would she send you keys to a house when she is home? According to your testimony, she works there and she sleeps there. Why would she need to send you keys?
My testimony is she slept in her home, and she was a writer and she worked out of her home. And she sent me the keys so that if I arrived and she was not home, I'd be able to get in the house.
You would agree, Mr. Durst, that the story about her sending you keys is something that, again, did not come up until this trial. Is that correct?
You keep bringing up that I only bring it up at this trial, and I did not bring it up before. It never came up before.
So listen to my question, Mr. Durst. I didn't ask you why it never came up before. Your attorneys can ask you about that on redirect. My question is, do you agree that it never came up before this trial?
I don't know if it ever came up before this trial.
So can you tell me one person that you told this information to about Susan Berman sending you keys?
Trying to think of who I would have talked to. There is no person I can think of who I would have talked to about Susan Berman's daily habits.
So again, listen to my question. Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that there is no information you are aware of, no evidence you are aware of, that you ever mentioned anything about these keys prior to your testimony? Is that correct?
Yes.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that given the situation, you need to be able to explain how you would have been able to get into a house that is potentially locked if Susan is either dead inside or if she's not home? You need to explain that, correct?
I don't need to explain whatever you just said.
So, Mr. Durst, would you agree that keys, who has them, where they got them from, was an issue with Kathy on the day that she disappeared, correct?
Keys.
Keys to the Mercedes-Benz.
Was an issue.
An issue, Mr. Durst, in you having to explain certain evidence in that case. With Kathy, you agree that you had to explain how it was that you were fighting over the coat, that the keys fell out, that there was actually a second set of keys. Keys became, you would agree, a part of the narrative of what happened with Kathy on the last time you saw her on January 31st, correct?
Correct.
Would you also agree that keys became an issue with Morris Black in terms of how he got in the house, when you took the keys away, when you recovered the keys, were taken away from the first shooting, the second shooting? Agreed?
This is interesting. I never thought of it that way. Right. Keys seem to play a large part in my life.
And would you agree then, this is now the third instance with the third person that we're talking about in this case. We have Kathy, a key issue. Morris, a key issue, and now Susan, a key issue. Would you agree?
I think that's very interesting.
So I assume that means you would agree, right?
I agree.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that with all three key situations, you are having to explain how it was that either the person who is now dead or missing had keys or found keys, or how you ended up getting into a place that's associated with the person who is dead or missing? Agreed?
Argumentative.
Sustained.
All right, you said that you arrive at the house and you walk up to the front door. What's the next thing that happens?
There was a note on the front door that said, Bobby, I am doing my walk. Back in an hour, Susie.
And was it taped to the door? How was it on the door?
I think it was taped.
So you have a taped note on the door, and you see this note, and what's the next thing that you do?
I peek in through the foyer window to see if I can see if she's home. Because the note could have been written 5 minutes ago, or it could have been written an hour ago. Which meant that either I'd be waiting just a few minutes, or I'd be waiting for an hour. When I looked into the foyer window, I did not see her anywhere in the house. I did see some dogs. What I also saw was the back door outside of the kitchen was wide open.
So you could see the wide open kitchen door when you peeked through the window, is that correct?
Correct.
And at that point in time, did you knock on the door, or what did you do?
Yes, I knocked and knocked, and rang the bell.
And what did you do next?
I waited 5 minutes maybe, and then I unlocked the door and walked in.
And did you have to, by the way, how many locks did she have?
She had 2 locks on the exterior and a deadbolt on the interior.
And was it one key that fit all of the locks?
No, 2 keys, one for the doorknob and one for one of those locks that slides across.
And is that, so in other words, to get in, would you have to end up unlocking both?
To get in, you'd have to unlock 2 locks.
So she had her door bolted, is that correct?
Bolted?
Meaning you have a lock, I assume one of those locks is a bolt and one is just the lock on the door?
She had the kind of key that went in the doorknob.
Right.
There was another key that moved something or other across the door opening. On the inside of their house is what I call a deadbolt, because it's not accessible from outside the house.
Right, but that deadbolt is the same key that you're unlocking on top.
The deadbolt has no lock, has no key. That's the whole point of the deadbolt. It has to be physically moved.
It's got no key on the inside, correct? But on the outside, you can unlock the deadbolt with the key, right?
No, there's no key on the inside or the outside.
So what is the second lock that you're unlocking that's on the outside? What is that for?
The second lock, one key went into the doorknob. One key moved something inside the locking mechanism. What Susie would do was lock both of those.
Go ahead.
The deadbolt is called a deadbolt because it's not accessible from outside the house. In order to open or close a deadbolt, you have to be inside the house. There's no key.
I want to put up what's...
Excuse me, Your Honor, it's really distracting for him to stand up and walk away in the middle of an answer.
I'm trying to move this along as expeditiously as I can, Your Honor. It's not meant as any disrespect. It's meant to get the
Okay.
next exhibit ready.
Thank you.
Zoom up on it.
On the screen is people 31 to change it.
Mr. Durst, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as the inside of Susan's front door. Do you see the thing that is right here? Is this what you're referring to as the deadbolt? This thing?
Indicating for the record a golden lock above the two doorknobs in the front.
Thank you, Mr.
If that's what it shows,
Well, I'm asking you, is that what it appears to show? Let's freeze it. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Durst, I want to show this to you. Maybe it'll be easier for you to see it if I bring it up close. So what I'm talking about is and I'm pointing to the gold thing at the top on the right side door, above the handles. Do you see that? The little
I
item
see.
there?
I see it.
You would agree that that is a lock that appears to be something that you can twist, commonly called a deadbolt, that you can twist and lock, correct?
Correct.
And you would agree that on the other side, Mr. Durst, is a keyhole for that lock. Where's the front door?
This is the front door.
Okay. Putting up people's 31E. Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that this is the front door and that the item on top, hold this, you can take a look at that the item on top, this item right here, is the other side of that deadbolt that has a lock in it, correct?
Correct.
So my question is, it's your testimony that it was two separate keys to unlock the front door and the deadbolt, is that correct?
Two separate keys, correct.
And how sure are you of that?
Very.
Okay, so you take this, thank you. So you unlock the deadbolt, you use the key to open up the door, and you went inside, is that correct?
Correct.
What's the next thing that happened?
I could either go straight ahead, which would take me by the bedrooms, or take a right and go past her office, what she considered her office, her table where she kept her computer, and into the kitchen.
And when you came in, Mr. Durst, did you hear the dogs barking and growling?
I think one of them was barking. I think one was in the backyard.
Is that what you testified to on direct examination, Mr. Durst?
I don't remember what I testified to on direct examination, but I think one dog was in the backyard, and I think another dog was barking.
Did the dogs at all come up to you and bark and growl when you came in the house?
No,
They didn't know you, though, correct?
they did not know me.
And you've heard testimony from Mela Kaufman, correct?
I heard testimony from Ella Kaufman.
Did you hear her testimony about how aggressive the dogs were when people would come over?
I don't recall that. I do know the dogs were always fighting amongst themselves.
And it's your position that the dogs let you walk in and none of them came up to you, none of them barked and growled at you, is that correct?
One of them was barking. One was in the backyard. I don't remember seeing the other dog.
So you walked into the kitchen, is that correct? By the way, didn't you say on August 16th, 2021, play, I'll just read it, it's going to be easier. Mr. Durst, well, after ringing the bell and knocking for 5 minutes, I unlocked the front door, walked in, and as soon as I got in, I could see the dogs. I don't remember if I saw all three of them or if it was just two of them, but right away I saw the dogs there. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
Well, did you at any point indicate during your initial testimony that one of the dogs was barking at you and one of the dogs was in the backyard?
You keep bringing up these insignificant details. I testified exactly the same just now as I did to Dick DeGuerin in August.
August is in last week.
Oh, this is August. It doesn't seem like August when you're in jail. What I said to Dick is the same thing I'm saying to you.
Well,
That one of the dogs was in the backyard and another dog was visible and barking, and I don't know where the third dog was.
but you indicated, Mr. Durst, that you said, I don't remember if I saw all three of them or if it was just two of them, but right away I saw the dogs there, meaning inside the house, correct, Mr. Durst?
One I saw inside the house, and one was in the backyard.
You didn't say that, though, to Mr. DeGuerin. You didn't mention the backyard, correct?
I didn't mention backyard. I thought I said they were either in the house or in the backyard.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that in your experience, when people lie about things, even when they go into great detail, would you agree that one way to catch them on lies is to have them repeat what's happened and that eventually they start telling stories differently? Would you agree that in your experience, just as a human being, you found that to be the case with people who lie?
Argument.
Sustained.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that you are telling a different story now than you told to Mr. DeGuerin?
352.
I would agree.
352A.
Oh, the court sustained Dick DeGuerin's argument.
Oh, no, you're one back. He overruled the next one.
Oh, you mean you asked me another question that quickly?
I just fire him off. Go ahead, I'll let you catch up. I'll wait. Tell me when you're ready.
Yes, you were much faster than the court reporters. I think you asked me a long question, something about how to tell if somebody's lying. And my answer is, I don't know how to tell if somebody's lying.
That was sustained.
No, the question,
That's also stricken.
the question, you know what? Let me just move on. So, the next thing you did is correct, is you walked into the kitchen, is that right?
Correct,
And you still have not seen Susan's body yet, is that correct?
correct.
And did you say the following? We're walking into the kitchen. I walked by the kitchen table, which Susan also used as a desk. Her computer was on it, the telephone was on it, the telephone charger was on it. Question, but now is that in the kitchen or was that in her office? Answer, say that again. Was that in the kitchen or was that in her office? It was in the kitchen. but she used the kitchen table as a desk. Is that your testimony?
Correct.
So you go into the kitchen, and you clearly remember that on the kitchen table, there was a computer, there was a telephone on it, and there was a telephone that had the telephone had a charger. It was a cordless telephone. Is that correct?
It wasn't cordless, it was a corded telephone.
It was what now?
It was not a cordless telephone. It was a regular telephone with a cord that went from the charger to the phone.
Mr. Durst, so was it, if it had a charger, are you saying that it was a regular landline that was not a cordless phone, but that had a charger?
So, yes.
What kind of phone that is?
Wireless phone. Charging thing.
So you go in there and you pick up, you go through the kitchen and you see that her computer is on the table in the kitchen, correct?
Correct.
And you have a strong memory of that, is that correct?
Correct.
Can you please put up the photograph of the kitchen, please?
So there's quite a few crime scene photos. This is one of them. This is people's 31M.
31 now.
M is in here.
That's the table in the kitchen, correct, Mr. Durst?
No, there's a table on the other side of it.
There's a table on the other side of the kitchen? First, I want to show you the kitchen. This is going to be people's 31K. That's the door to orient you. That's the door, the back door, going to the backyard. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Now I want to show you from the other vantage point. Can you tilt it to the side? This is going to be 31L. This is now looking from the back door out in, back to the kitchen. Do you understand your orientation?
Yes.
Where's the second table?
You're not showing the portion of the house that is just outside the kitchen.
Well, Mr. Durst, what you said was, you were very clear, that she was using the kitchen table as her desk, and then on the kitchen table was a computer. That's not true, is it?
The table I'm referring to is just outside the kitchen.
I'm
The
sure, I'm just,
pantry or whatever you would call it.
but, Mr. Durst, that's not what you said, though, is it?
Did I say it was in them?
You said, correct, Mr. Durst, it was in the kitchen, but she used the kitchen table as a desk. You said in the kitchen. That's the kitchen table, correct?
It's not the table I'm thinking of.
Okay, so what's the next thing that you did at this point in time?
I walked over to the back door where I realized that I could not see the whole yard from the back door. So I became aware that the backyard was full of dog dew. I very carefully walked the 15 feet or so of backyard to where the wall of the canyon starts and looked around the backyard to see if Susan was there.
please play RD 743 from your testimony of August 16th, 2021.
This will be People's 321, transcript 321A.
When I turned around, I could see the whole backyard, and Susan was definitely not there, and I don't think any of the dogs were there either.
So what had happened with the dogs that you had seen, dog or dogs that you'd seen in the house when you first went in?
They must have stayed in the house. I did not see them in the backyard.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that that statement about where the dogs was is inconsistent with what you previously testified to?
No, I would not agree.
Well, you testified, Mr. Durst, that one of the dogs was in the backyard.
And I thought one was in the backyard.
Well, when you said, Mr. Durst, when you said originally, your first statement was you mentioned two dogs that were in the house and you couldn't see the third dog, correct? That was your original statement to Mr. DeGuerin, correct?
Correct.
And then today it was, I only saw one dog and the second dog was in the backyard and I don't know about the third dog, correct?
Correct.
And now your statement is, I went into the backyard and I didn't see any of the dogs in the backyard. All three of them must have been in the house, correct?
Correct.
Are those three statements consistent?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the next thing that happened after you were in the backyard and don't see Susan and don't see the dogs?
I heard cars honking
And where was this coming from?
in front of the house.
What's that?
The front of the house.
And what did you do at this point?
Well, I walked to the northern part of the house where there's a gate with a latch on it. I went over to the gate, undid the latch so that I could get out to where the driveway was. I saw a whole bunch of cars. It did not look like an accident. It looked like somebody had tried to make a U-turn on Benedict Canyon. And a lot of people were looking like they were trying to go around something or other. And they were all honking their horns.
What's the next thing that you did?
I walked south past the driveway to where I could see the front door. The front door was open like 6 or 8 inches. And I did not think I had left the door open.
Originally, you had to unlock the door and then turn the handle and open it, correct?
Correct.
And then you had to turn around, grab the handle, and close the door, correct?
Correct.
And then you have to go into the backyard, you talk about what you've seen, and now the second time coming in the house, you're saying the door is open, and your belief is you had closed the door. Is that correct?
I did not remember leaving it open. I was surprised that it was open.
And Mr. Durst, did you see the note that had been taped to the door?
No.
And would you agree that because it was taped, it didn't blow away, correct?
I don't know what happened to the note.
Well, I'm asking you, you said it was taped to the door,
I
correct?
believe it was taped.
And you would agree, Mr. Durst, that it was not particularly windy, that it would rip tape note off a door, correct?
I have no idea if it was windy.
Well, Mr. Durst, your response to seeing that note gone was what? What did you think when you saw that note was gone and the door was open?
I thought Susie must have gotten back from her walk while I was in the backyard.
And Mr. Durst, did it make sense to you that Susie was going on a walk without her dogs?
Without all the facial expressions, makes perfect sense that she would do her walk without the dogs.
So, I understand when you first see the door open and you see the note gone, you believe, you're saying now, that Susie had come home and that she had taken the note. Is that correct?
Correct.
You, later on, and we're going to get there in a moment, but you'll discover Susie's dead body, correct?
Correct.
And I want to make sure it's not your position that Susie Berman took the note off the door, correct?
Correct.
And it's not your position that Susie Berman left the closed door that you had closed open, correct?
I don't know. Well, either, as I see it, one of two things. Either Susie got back, opened the door, and got killed, or the killer opened the door and left.
And Mr. Durst, the sound that you heard of the car that had, how did you describe, what was the sound you heard?
Huh?
You heard a sound outside. You thought there'd been an accident, correct?
Honking.
What's that?
Honking.
Mr. Durst, did you ever hear a gunshot?
No, I heard honking.
Mr. Durst, you have extensive experience with firearms, correct?
Correct.
You understand what a 9mm gunshot sounds like, correct?
Well, I wouldn't know a 9mm from a 45 from a 22.
Wait a minute, you wouldn't know the difference of a sound between a 9mm or a 45 and a 22? One of those doesn't sound completely different than the others?
Not to me.
So you're telling me, Mr. Durst, that you're unaware that a 22 caliber firearm, when it's fired, makes a much different sound than does a higher caliber like a 9mm or a 45?
I have no knowledge of that.
So you have no knowledge, Mr. Durst, that as an example, a 22 is not nearly as loud as a 9mm or a 45?
I have no idea.
Mr. Durst, you did not hear a gunshot from a 22, a 9mm, or a 45, correct?
I did not hear a gunshot.
And Mr. Durst, do you agree that if Susan Berman had been killed when you were in that house or in that backyard, you would have certainly heard the gunshot, correct?
Not if he used a silencer.
A silencer. Do you have any information whatsoever that the killer used a silencer?
No, but I'm answering your question. I might not have heard a gunshot if whoever shot the gun was using a silencer.
Other than a silencer being used, Mr. Durst, would you agree that, to the best of your knowledge, there was no gunshot fired at any time while you were at that house, correct?
I heard no gunshot.
And would you agree, Mr. Durst, that other than a silencer, you believe if a gunshot had been fired, you would have heard it, correct?
Correct.
So, you go into the house, and the note's gone, but at this point in time, you're thinking Susie has taken the note. So what do you do when you go in the house?
I hollered Susie a few times, and then I walk straight ahead to where the bedrooms are. And out of the corner of my left eye, I see Susie lying on the floor of the bedroom on her back with her feet pointing towards the door.
By the way, I want to go back for a moment. When you were in the backyard and you opened the gate, you had to unlatch it, correct? It was closed.
Correct.
And I would assume, did you, when you went from the gate, you made sure to latch it, correct, after you went through it? So you unlatch it, go through the gate, and make sure it's latched when you leave, right?
Correct.
And you're going to do this because although I know you said you did not like Susie's dogs, you were aware this was a busy street, correct?
Correct.
And you've had a dog, you've lost a dog being hit by a car at one point, correct?
Yes,
I thought didn't you lose one of the Igors to a car accident many years ago?
Did I lose a dog to a car accident?
Yes.
Yes.
So you're aware of the danger of a dog getting out and getting hit by a car, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to be very conscious to make sure that when you're leaving the gate, you're going to make sure it's secured so the dogs can't get out, correct?
Correct.
So you go into the house now, and you walk in and explain where you were. Were you at to the point where you found Susie?
She was lying in the bedroom on her back with her feet pointing towards the door.
And can you describe when you saw her, what did you think?
I thought she fainted.
What's that?
I thought she fainted.
And at that point in time, what did you do?
I shouted, "Susie, Susie." I ran over to where she was. I squatted across her body. I put my hand down at her mouth and nose. And then I lifted her up by her upper arms. And then her head went back, and I saw that there was liquid around, in a puddle around her head. I dropped the body.
I want to play RD 746, please. It's your prior testimony, Mr. Durst.
Equals 322. 322. 322A. Thank you.
I put my hand over her face. I might have left that out to see if she was breathing, see if I could feel breath, and it felt cold.
So you end up realizing her face is cold, correct?
Correct.
And obviously, you're not wearing gloves during any of this, correct?
Correct.
And so you end up, at this point in time, you realize the liquid's blood, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's red, you can't miss it, right?
It wasn't red, it was black.
It's black because it had coagulated, correct?
Well, black, for whatever the reason is, it was black.
But, Mr. Durst, you're aware of what happens to blood when it's been around for a while, correct?
No, not correct.
So, Mr. Durst, is it your testimony that if assume somebody was shot, and that shooting happened immediately, would you agree they're going to have red blood?
Yes.
So the blood you saw was much darker because it was old blood, wasn't it?
I don't know if it was old blood or new blood.
Well, Mr. Durst, if you agree that fresh blood is red, and are you saying in your life you have no experience with what dried blood looks like?
Correct.
You dismembered a person, Mr. Durst. Are you telling me that you don't know what dried blood looks like coming from a dead person? Is that your testimony?
Correct.
So how was it, Mr. Durst, that you dismembered Morris Black? What did you do with Morris's blood?
When I dismembered Morris Black, I had thrown a throw cloth over his body.
Did you drain him when you dismembered him, did you drain the blood in the tub or the toilet?
I did not drain his blood.
Well, Mr. Durst, you agree that there was a lot of blood from Morris Black that ended up leaving his body after you shot him, correct?
Correct.
And would you further agree that when you first saw the blood from Morris Black, it was red blood, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree that when you came back hours later, and when you dismembered him the next day, that that blood was now the same dark color as the blood you saw from Susan Berman, correct?
No, I would not go there.
What do you mean you would not go there? What does that mean?
I don't know that Morris Black's blood was the same color as Susan Berman's blood.
Well, you agree Susan Berman's blood was not red, it was dark, like Black, you said, correct?
Correct.
Have you ever seen fresh blood that comes out of a person's body that is black?
The problem is with timing.
Please explain.
Well, are we talking fresh blood means 1 minute later when you say old blood, you say blood turns dark later, are we talking about an hour, 2 hours, a day?
Mr. Durst, based on your experience dismembering Morris Black, and just your opinion as a 78-year-old man, how long did it appear to you that approximately Susan Berman had been dead? And I'm not asking you to give a definition like a coroner, she'd been dead 16 hours. I'm asking you, did it look like she just died, or did it look like she'd been dead for a number of hours?
I have no idea.
You have no idea.
Zero idea.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that it is very important for you in this case to have Susan Berman's death be as fresh as possible? Are you aware of that?
No.
Well, Mr. Durst, would you agree that there are two issues that you are dealing with testifying right now with respect to Susan Berman's time of death? That one of those issues is the idea that you spoke to her at no earlier than 11 p.m. the night before, and you're coming there at 10 a.m., meaning that she has to be alive at that point. You would agree that's a point that you're having to deal with, correct?
Yeah, an argument.
It's foundational to my next.
That's overruled.
Mr. Durst, you would agree that's an issue that you're having to explain, correct?
You're trying to, yes.
Okay? And you also understand that you have to explain why it is that by the time you are dealing with her 11 hours later, there's no evidence of any rigor, any body stiffening, correct?
I don't have to explain that whatsoever.
What?
The forensic that you quoted said that rigor mortis sets in, I think he said 6 or 8 hours after death.
So, Mr. Durst, then, would you agree that if rigor mortis, the testimony from, I can play it, from Dr. Fajardo was rigor sets in 2 to 4 hours? Would you agree that's what he testified to?
I would accept it if you're telling me that.
Okay, so if rigor sets in 2 to 4 hours, then you would agree that if she died at any time, meaning the latest she could have died and there had been no evidence of any rigor while you were there, you agree is going to be 6 a.m., correct?
Jack, form the question.
Sustained.
Also, lack of
I sustained it.
Well, Mr. Durst, if you're saying, you just said you agree that rigor sets in 2 to 4 hours, and if you're seeing her at 10 and there's no rigor, then you would agree that either it hasn't set in yet, which would mean you would agree she has to have been killed within 4 hours of you seeing her, correct?
352.
I will agree.
Previous ruling.
That the court
Hold on.
justice,
You know, what's the grounds for the objection?
He said 352.
352?
Yeah,
And
he did say
previous-
352.
Previous ruling.
Yeah, hold on, let me look. It's problematic, but I'm not sure it's the 352 problem. Look, let's see. You said you agree, Rigor sets in, and if you're seeing her, you'd agree either it hasn't set in, which means you'd agree she'd have to be killed within 4 hours. All right, sustain.
Can I ask the grounds, Your Honor?
352, more prejudicial, substantially more prejudicial than probative. Subject to, it's possibly confusing and misleading.
Mr. Durst. Your Honor, may we approach?
Yeah, why don't we, well, yeah, I know. Why don't you move to another area? Actually, no. All right, let's go back. Let's go quick. Reformulate.
Can I continue, Your Honor? So, Mr. Durst, after you found Susan's body, what is the next thing that you did?
I ran into the kitchen and I grabbed her phone.
And can you describe the phone, please?
It was a regular old landline phone.
A regular landline phone does not have a charger, correct?
No, it's not correct. When I say a regular landline phone, it did have a charger.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that there are cordless phones that have chargers? You know what that is, correct?
Correct.
And there are landline phones that don't have, they're not electric, you don't plug them in, you just plug the phone line into the phone, correct?
You plug the phone line into the phone.
And then the other part of the phone line goes into a wall jack, correct?
Correct.
And that's not an electrical piece, that is just how you plug in an old kind of traditional landline phone, correct?
That's what I call the charger.
Wait, what are you calling the charger?
The charger and the phone were on the table. The phone was not in the charger.
Okay, I want to show you, Mr. Durst. Can you put up the picture, please?
We don't have it just yet. Finish your line, Your Honor. I mean, John, come back.
Okay.
Am I saying something?
Sorry, Your Honor.
One moment.
See the picture.
So the phone that you used, where was it, Mr. Durst?
On the table by the kitchen.
So it was not right where Susan was, it was on a table, is that correct?
Susan was in the bedroom.
Okay,
Phone was on the table by the kitchen.
okay. I want to put up the phone. Mr. Bailey?
Yes, come.
Yes.
Sorry, okay. 31 U.
We lost it on this one. There it goes. This is a table and a desk, not in the kitchen, but in the living room. Would you agree?
Next to the kitchen.
Well, the kitchen's another room, but is this what you're referring to as the phone you used?
Yes,
And you indicated, Mr. Durst, that this phone, correct, your testimony was it didn't work, so you put it into the charger and it still didn't work. Is that correct?
Sorry to interrupt, John. This is People's 323. It's a close-up of that phone.
Thank you.
Mr. Durst, does that phone have a charger?
that phone plugs into something and was unplugged.
Do you see, Mr. Durst, only one cord coming from the phone?
Correct.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that that is going to be a phone cord, a phone line that plugs into a wall, not an electrical piece? Would you agree?
I see one cord coming from the earpiece.
So can you explain, Mr. Durst, where is the charger that you testified that you put this phone in when it didn't work? That was your testimony that I played for you already today, correct?
The phone was off the hook.
So the phone was off the hook, so you're calling the phone base now the charger.
Correct.
Was that the only phone that you saw, Mr. Durst?
Yes.
Can you go to the photo, the photo of Susan's body, please?
31AA.
Is that the position you found Susan Berman in?
Yes.
What's to the right of her body?
I don't know.
You don't know what the white thing is to the right of her body?
I don't know.
Can you zoom up on it?
That's fair. I have another photo. 31FF.
What is that, Mr. Durst?
I don't know.
You don't know what that item is, the white thing.
Correct.
You don't recognize that as a telephone.
Correct.
What do you think it is?
I never thought about it. I've never seen this picture before.
Well, you're looking at the picture now, Mr. Durst. What does that appear to be?
It appears to be the same kind of phone that was on the table by the kitchen.
And when you say it appears to be the same kind of phone, you now recognize that to be a telephone. Is that correct?
A telephone.
And can you tell me, Mr. Durst, since it's right next to Susan's body, why didn't you use that phone?
I don't remember ever seeing that phone.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that it's pretty hard to miss if you're looking at Susan Berman's body?
No.
So your position is you found her body, and then instead of using the phone that is a few inches away from her, that is sticking out, that instead you went into another room to find a different phone to use. Is that your testimony?
Correct.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that this phone does not appear to have a charger either?
This phone is, as far as what I'm referring to as a charger, is what the phone sits on. And this phone was off the charger.
Mr. Durst, so you're telling me that you believe that that piece that goes to this phone actually charges this landline phone?
Yeah.
All right. After you found Susan's body, you go to the kitchen, and by the way, do you try to do CPR on her at all?
No.
So you go to the kitchen and you pick up that phone there, is that correct?
Correct.
and you, at that point in time, you can't make any phone work, is that correct?
Correct.
What did you do to try to make the phone work?
I put it back onto what I'm calling the charger.
Mr. Durst, you're aware that the phones in her house were working, correct?
It was working the night before, yes.
And Mr. Durst, you are also aware from the investigation that the phones were working after her murder as well, correct? What's the objection?
That's not the testimony.
That's,
It's unplugged.
Mr. Lewin wants to move on, so we can move on.
What? There's phone messages. Your Honor, there are phone messages that we played
Okay,
that
okay.
are after this time that have been played in this trial.
Confront him with those.
Mr. Durst, you heard the answering machine messages that occur after the 23rd, correct? We played them in this trial. Do you remember them?
No,
Well, Mr. Durst, I want you to assume that there are phone messages from various neighbors inquiring about Susan's condition because of the dogs being loose. Would you agree that you could not leave a phone message if the phone didn't work? Would you agree?
I have no knowledge based on to agree or disagree.
Well, Mr. Durst,
Some answering machines work without a telephone. Some answering machines have telephones.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that for an answering machine or a phone to work, they have to be plugged in to the phone line, or you can't just have a phone sitting there, an answering machine sitting there that isn't plugged in, meaning plugged into the phone line, it won't work, correct? You know that.
You're on the screen. It's on the display.
Do you remember, Mr. Durst, we played, this is one of the calls, this is from Sunday. Sunday would be what date, Mr. Durst?
Zoom it. This is People's 12, the transcript is People's 12A. Thank you.
11:36 a.m. Subject, 11:36 a.m. Interior check card next door. I just checked to make sure you're okay. We have Lewin. I guess she got down to the neighbors up down the street, got there, so they brought her here.
You can stop it.
So call me when you get the message. 310-246-0411. She's fine. But
Mr. Durst, so you've testified that the phone was working the night before between 11 and 12 when you called her, correct?
Correct.
And you agree that the phone was working after you were in the house, correct?
No, I don't agree. I have no idea if the phone was working. My experience was the phone was not working.
You just heard a call from Sunday the 24th, Mr. Durst. You agree that's a phone call from the neighbor Jeff Cutter on Sunday, December 24th. You would agree to that, correct?
Yes, that's a call on Sunday. When I found Susan Berman's body, it was Saturday morning at 10, not Sunday.
So it's your testimony that the phone worked the night before you talked to her. The phone worked the next day, but for some reason it wasn't working only while you were there on the 23rd. Is that your testimony?
All right, I have a 352. But I need to explain it to the court without.
Tell me later. Overruled.
Is that your
It's
testimony?
important now, Your Honor.
It's overruled.
My testimony is that when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone.
Would you agree, Mr. Durst, that, can you explain, let me ask you this, can you explain how there would be no dial tone when you picked up the phone, but clearly there had to be a dial tone when you called the day before, and there had to be a dial tone when Cutter called the day after? Can you explain that?
There's nothing
352,
to
and I need to
explain.
explain it to the court.
Overruled. You may not approach.
Can you
Continue.
explain that?
let's do that too.
Mr. Durst, can you explain it?
I have no need to explain it. What I said is what happened.
So, Mr. Durst, when you say you have no need to explain it, do you understand that that's not a responsive answer? Do you understand that?
No, I don't understand that.
So, you don't get to choose what you need to explain or not. Either my question is a legitimate question and the judge has overruled an
Okay.
objection.
You need
have to
not
answer
explain it. You'll answer the question, or there may be comment about your refusal to answer.
Can you explain it, Mr. Durst?
I don't see that there's anything to explain.
What I'm asking you to explain, Mr. Durst, is how it is that the phone worked on the 22nd, it worked on the 24th, and you're saying that while you were there on the 23rd, it did not work. That's what I'm asking you to explain.
352 objection.
Overruled.
When I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone.
Let's, the next exhibit, Mr. Balian.
Equals 324.
324?
Photograph.
What was 323? 323 was the phone, close-up. 324.
Mr. Durst, this is a photograph. This is the cord from the phone on the desk that you said you used. Do you see that cord plugged in to the wall?
I do.
And you would agree, Mr. Durst, I showed you the last photograph, that the answering machine is connected with that phone on the desk, correct?
Correct.
Can you figure out a reason, Mr. Durst, why, if that phone is plugged in, why it would not have been working on the 23rd, but worked on the 22nd and the 24th?
The phone was not working when I tried to use it.
Mr. Durst, I'll take that answer as you have no explanation. Is that correct?
Comment, and I
Yep.
put a 352, Your Honor, that I need to tell the court about.
No, overruled.
Mr. Durst, I will take your answer as that means you have no explanation. Is that correct?
I'm back at the point where I don't see any need to explain it.
I'm going to take one more try, Mr. Durst.
Now
The
you can
judge-
move on.
I'm sorry?
He's not explaining it. You may move on.
Okay. Mr. Durst, when the phone didn't work, your intention was to call 911 right at that time, correct?
Correct.
So the only reason that you did not call 911 is the phone did not work, correct?
Correct.
So why didn't you immediately run next door to a neighboring house and try to get help?
I didn't.
I didn't ask you what you did, Mr. Durst. We know what you did. I asked you why you did not do that. Do you have an explanation?
I keep having to come up with these explanations. I did what I did when I did what I felt I needed to do.
So again, Mr. Durst, I'm going to take from that answer that you do not have an explanation. Is that correct?
I don't have a need for an explanation. I don't think it's explainable.
So, Mr. Durst, that's a different answer. You would agree, Mr. Durst, that the reason you do not have an explanation for any of the things I've asked you is because, quite frankly, it's not explainable. Correct?
Correct.
You are stuck with, this is what I did, I cannot explain why I did it, but you'll just have to accept I did it anyway, correct?
Correct.
That's
No,
argument.
that's a-
I object and move to strike.
You know,
Okay. You need to object contemporaneously with the question, but I will sustain it and strike the answer. Go ahead.
Your Honor, I can, in terms of where I'm at, this is a good time. We're 2 minutes.
Very well, ladies and gentlemen, we will resume tomorrow at 9 o'clock Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. May be seated. So, Mr. DeGuerin, you kept on insisting that you should approach, even though there was an objection that didn't really seem to have any basis. You can explain your basis now.
Yes, it's creating a false impression. The other phone, the phone that was in the bedroom, was unplugged from the wall. I believe that's the one that he tried to call on, and he's mistaken about it being the one on the desk.
Okay,
There's photographs of it being unplugged. They're in evidence.
Okay, objection's overruled. Thank you. Now, next, Mr. Chesnoff. Earlier, you wanted to put something on the record. You still or no?
No, I had a conversation with Mr. Lewin, and I'm comfortable.
Thank you. Next is a discovery order. I am going to now order discovery of any material regarding a defense expert pursuant to Penal Code Section 1054.3, which requires reciprocal discovery. I'm ordering it immediately under the circumstances that it is late in the trial. I'm ordering it immediately or else it will be excluded under 1054.5.
Your Honor, the court didn't say, but I assume the order specifically goes to the expert on the Asperger's issue.
That's what, yes, to be clear. Then,
Your Honor, can the court inquire of the defense whether they have that information to turn over, what the situation is?
well, they're ordered to turn it over. Whatever they have, they're ordered to turn it over. Okay, next, we're talking about time now, so listen carefully. Mr. Lewin, I'm putting you on a time budget now. I'm going to tell you what the budget is, and I'm going to tell you the reason for it.
Okay.
I want you to finish your cross-examination by the end of the day tomorrow. And further questions, I would intend to sustain objection under 352 and 765 of the Evidence Code. Reason for it, and I don't know if you thought you were going to use more time than that, but do I need to explain?
Well, Your Honor, I would like to, here's the problem. I'm restricted by the fact that Mr. Durst, in testifying, I've gone through, I'm incredibly organized. I don't waste time, but I'm stuck with the answers that he gives me. I've methodically gone through his original perjury, the way that he responds to questions. I've then gone through Kathy. I'm finishing up with Susan. I still have to do Morris Black. I still have to do the cleanup as well as everything that happened in Galveston. I cannot finish tomorrow, Your Honor, because in the end, I've got to do a competent job going through this information. I believe, Your Honor, that I would absolutely be able to finish on Tuesday. But, Your Honor, in the end, I've got to do my job, and what's happening is that Mr. Durst, in either not answering questions, making me repeat questions, coming up with material lies that I have to impeach, I can tell the court, Your Honor, that I'm almost done with the information on Susan, and then I'm moving over to Morris. But, Your Honor, how can the court, in the end, I'm not wasting any time, and I'm limited. The defendant is up there perjuring himself like none of us have ever seen. I understand that an argument could be, well, the jury understands that he's perjuring himself, so they're just going to end up disregarding the information that's there. I've got to cover Galveston, Your Honor. I've got to do a professional job in the position I'm in. You know, we've spent years and years and an incredible amount of resources trying to put this case together competently. So I'm asking for the court, Your Honor, if I went through my entire outline, I would end up not finishing until the end of next week. I'm asking to be able to have until the end of the day on Tuesday so I can finish up what's very important testimony.
So the record should be clear that the defendant testified beginning on August 17th and testified on the 18th, that's half a day. 18th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, and 25th, it's 5.5 days. I'm sorry, that's not right. That's cross-examination. On direct examination, it was a total of 24 hours of testimony. I counted. You've been cross-examining half a day on the 17th, then the 18th, 19th, 23rd, 24th, 25th. That's 5.5 days. By tomorrow, that'll be 6.5 days. The defense presented 24 hours of testimony. You so far have used 38 hours to cross-examine. That's 150%, more than 150% of the time. So I would think the following is true. First of all, the defendant's testimony was not credible. Secondly, on day one, it appeared that you really effectively destroyed any possible credibility of this witness. On day three, I believe, by day three, I think you had very, very serious, I would even say profound admissions. Day 4, day 5, you're going through each of his statements to prove that every statement is false. Every statement he has made, it seems you're addressing, and you're right. I think at some point there's a limit. It doesn't seem there's any further purpose. It seems additional questioning would be an undue consumption of time. So at some point it becomes inconsistent with 765, the mode and manner of cross-examination. Your cross-examination has been effective. It has been, I would say, devastating. But to use additional time at this point is, we're losing jurors. Jurors are sending notes. And not only that, there is at some point there's a toll even on the witness. I will consider that. Now you're right, I think, about aspects of his testimony. As I said, I don't believe it was credible in the first place. But it's at this point it's almost gratuitous. I think that you have a different conception of the case, I think, than anyone else, and I understand that, but I think that it has to be proportionate. Your presentation must be proportionate with the rest of the litigation.
Your Honor, in response, I think this is important. You can't simply add up the amount of hours that have been spent by each side, because the problem is it's very easy. They're telling a story on direct, meaning Mr. Durst is telling a story on direct, and it's very simple to get that story out. What I have to do on cross is I have to address the story and I have to address the other information I have. The court had said that I mentioned the other day that I would end up going into next week. At the very least, Your Honor, I'm going to respectfully ask the court, can the court at least, I've got to have Monday. I mean, I'm cutting this thing. I can't cover the information I have to cover. We've spent a year and a half on this case, Your Honor, and what's going to happen if, because I don't have time to go through the situation with Morris Black and the flight to Pennsylvania, etc., I'm going to have to cut a bunch of stuff. I'm asking the court, Your Honor, I had wanted to do far into next week. I got to have at least I got to have all of Monday. I mean, I asked, Your Honor, I think Tuesday was very reasonable. I'm not repeating myself. I'm going through. The only issue regarding repetition is I can't control when he comes up with incredible statements. The problem is because we're not at Morris Black yet, I haven't covered that at all. So, Your Honor, I'm really
Morris
begging.
Black is that evidence is you've been able to use that already in cross-examination, and very effectively so. So, and you should address that tomorrow. I think that's right. But I'll say this. Depends on how. See, every time it seems to me in general that you're challenging and confronting the defendant about some fact, then some new fact develops that you wish to also confront. So it has a geometric progression. So I will say that if tomorrow there is something that necessitates taking additional time, I wouldn't foreclose additional time as needed. But let's see how you're doing at the end of the day.
Okay, understood, Your Honor. I am asking the court, I understand that the court's frustrated, everybody's frustrated. I think the court understands this is not a question of me asking irrelevant questions or wasting time or being unorganized. This is an incredibly complex case. Mr. Durst chose to testify, and he is up there, Your Honor, and again, I'm very confident saying this. I've done this almost 30 years. You've done it even longer. I'm very confident that you've never seen a defendant commit this much perjury while he's testifying and have a prosecutor have to be having to respond to not only what he has said already, but to have to go off on different courses because he says something. Just as an example.
Well, no, let's not get into examples, but no, I think that, I think, I don't dispute your characterization here, but keep in mind, this is something that follows a comprehensive presentation of evidence. I think the jurors have a very good idea of what all of the other evidence is, and they're going to keep in mind, and I will instruct them to keep in mind, whether the testimony makes sense when compared with all the other evidence. So in a case where there's very little evidence, and you might very well, there is some risk that a far-fetched story might persuade a juror or two. I don't think that's the case here. You have a method that you and I, we all have talked about the method you use, and it's controversial in a number of ways. First of all, it's obviously complex. It involves, it's quite methodical, it's quite time-consuming, and I appreciate the benefit of that, but there's also a cost of that, and I have to keep that in mind when I'm controlling the mode and manner of examination of witnesses, which it is my duty to control. So, I think that while we're on the subject, I mean, let's talk about the nature of the questions. So there have been multiple objections that the questions are argumentative. And I want you to know that I keep in mind People versus Chapman, 38 Cal 4th, that's C-H-A-T, Chapman, 38 Cal 4th, 344 at page 382 to 384, which guides us as to what is argumentative and what is not. Does the question call for new facts or information? And here I will say that there's a complication, that Mr. Durst is not an ordinary witness. I think he persistently and skillfully describes situations that the defense later, well, that the people are showing not to be credible. So he has admitted that he lies, and he's admitted how he lies. So it becomes relevant to look not only at the fact itself, but the statements about the fact, and whether there are lies about that fact, and whether one can tell the difference between what is dishonest and what is not. So I have given you leeway to explore how the defendant goes about telling his stories. So under People versus Shazier, 60 Cal 4th, 109 at 142, the prosecutor was entitled to explore reasons why information or opinion supplied by a defense witness might be less credible and reliable. For example, because of the witness's personal biases, evasiveness, or lack of familiarity with the relevant facts. That allowed broad cross-examination on over the objection of argument. The other case in Chapman, which I referred to previously, court should carefully scrutinize "they were lying" questions, that's in quotes. In context, they should not be permitted when argumentative or when designed to elicit testimony that is irrelevant or speculative. However, in its discretion, a court may permit such questions if the witness to whom they are addressed has personal knowledge that allows him to provide competent testimony that may legitimately assist the trier of fact in resolving credibility questions. And indeed, Mr. Durst has been confronted with things that he does know, and the questions go to his credibility. But sometimes there are objectionable questions and there is no objection posed. I do sustain objections to argumentative questions, so I don't think the defense can invoke futility here. So I know there's some frustration on the part of the defense that they don't seem to understand how I can allow these questions. The reason I'm allowing them is the authority that I've just described. So nevertheless, at times the questions become argumentative, And there is a bit of repetition there, though that's not a valid objection, but to the point of not using too much time. In many different areas, there is a slight misuse of time, Mr. Lewin, and you do take more time than you need to take, and that adds up, so that cumulatively we have a problem, which I'm trying to address, and I will address, by limiting your cross-examination. So we'll see how you're doing at the end of the day tomorrow, and we'll see how much more is permissible. But you certainly may cover that subject matter that you described, but you can figure it out. You're a very good lawyer. You can figure out how to do it.
Let me propose something that might be of assistance to the court. The court is willing to let me have to the end of the day on Monday. I will not call the witness that I was going to have to call, the detective, to go back through to indicate all of the pieces of evidence that are in discovery that Mr. Durst has disputed. I will not call the Lenox Hill people regarding anything relating to the residency. I will basically take the court's observation that in essence, any person who's, and this is my paraphrase, not the court's, but that in essence, unless the jury is not paying attention, they cannot buy off on the residency issue, the match, etc. I won't call that witness. I will not call Detective Becerra, who I was going to call back to the stand. I will not call Bill Mayer, who I was going to call back on rebuttal. I will restrict my rebuttal to Andrew Jarecki and that one area. That cuts our rebuttal down from at least a day to about a half an hour. I'm going to ask the court if I agree to do that. The court already said we could have that day of rebuttal. I'm going to ask that the court, Your Honor, let me have, because I have to plan this out. I can't be in a position where I don't know what I get on Monday. So in exchange, Your Honor, that's a fair time exchange. I'm asking that I be given till the end of the day on Monday, and we will have our one rebuttal witness on Tuesday.
So I appreciate that, Mr. Lewin. So that is a very important consideration for me tomorrow at the end of the day when we see how you do, as well as whether the witness, for some reason, causes you to need additional time. But that's well taken. So, Mr. Chesnut.
I make a motion that you hit the bell.
Oh, before we do that, so we have a juror. I'm sorry, not a juror, but on account of a juror, we're breaking early on August 31. It seems to me that would be the time when we ought to hear from these lawyers for Jarecki. They've phoned the court. I'm not calling them back. I don't want to talk to them, but they want to have a hearing by phone, or we can have the hearing by phone on that day.
Your Honor, I apologize to the court, but what day is August 31st?
Tuesday, August 31 is next Tuesday. A juror is leaving at
yeah, that'd be perfect because...
So we'll do the hearing at that time. We won't waste that time,
okay.
But we'll contact them and let them know that... I'm wondering if we should work through lunch, though. I'll talk to staff about whether they want to do that, but it'll be that afternoon. Okay? Whenever we resume. I'd like to maximize our juror time on that day.
Okay.
This is on Tuesday?
Yes. All right? So
we're certainly willing, if the court is, we'll work through lunch or any breaks the court wants.
Right. I'm going to talk to staff because it's, you know, it's a request. I don't know. Dictate that kind of thing.
After you ring the bell, may we approach briefly?
All right, Mr. Chestnut's motion is granted, and Department 1 is adjourned.
Was that picked up on court?